Hello and welcome to another episode of Be an Awesome GP. Today we are going to be taking a deep dive into gaming disorders, particularly physically associated symptoms in gaming disorders. I am just stoked that we have Dr. Daniel Stepanovic here on the podcast with us today. He is from the University of Queensland and he has just recently published a paper, Extended Hours of Video Game Play and Negative Physical Symptoms and Pain in Computers in Human Behaviour. Daniel, thank you for taking the time to be here with us.
It's my pleasure, Chris.
Before I start, we are recording here on the traditional lands of the Dharawal people. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. And this is going to be more of a journal club type episode. And we're going to be looking at Dan's paper. So Dan, do you want to just give us, I know I'm asking a lot, but a very brief overview of what your paper was, and then we'll drill down into the specifics.
Sure. So this paper is one of several that we currently have in the pipeline as a result of a project that we've been calling the International Gaming Study 2022, or IGS 2022. The impetus behind it was really the inclusion of gaming disorder as a diagnosable condition within the WHO's International Classification of Diseases when that was updated a few years ago. So we created a large survey that we disseminated to individuals who play video games regularly. So for our purpose, regularly really just meant 3 hours a week. To my mind, that seemed like a low bar, because when I picture someone who's an avid gamer, I think of a lot more time than 3 hours. But that gives us a bit of range in terms of how many hours individuals actually play. For this particular paper, we were interested in symptoms of physical harm or pain and discomfort. So that's something that's not really focused on in this literature quite a lot. There was a lot more focus on social, emotional, and mental well-being, but not as much on physical. And for this particular paper, what we did was ask individuals if they had experienced certain symptoms in the preceding 12 months. Specifically, we looked at eye fatigue, wrist or hand pain, back or neck pain, or physical problems more generally, so headaches, muscle aches, and so on. And what came out of it, some of it was surprising. So we didn't really see any differences in terms of age or gender. What we did see is somewhat of a dose response. So individuals who played less than 3 hours did not report increased odds of these symptoms, but those who did report at least 3 hours of continuous play did report significantly increased odds of experiencing all of the physical symptoms. And that stayed reasonably consistent for those who reported playing for 6 hours continuously.
And I was actually really excited when I saw this paper because this whole area of gaming disorder, screen disorder, it's an area where it's not traditional work of the medical field, perhaps. It's a new evolving field, both in the mental aspect as well as the physical aspect. There are people now whose primary income comes from esports teams or gaming. There's no such thing as an esports physician, but I do wonder if that's something that's coming down the pipeline. But for the moment, general practice is there to help. So I enjoyed reading your study, and it was basically gamers. So it was targeted gamers only, and we can get into the numbers on gaming disorder later in the paper. They're slightly higher than the general population, and that's because it's a gamer catchment rather than a general population catchment.
That's right.
So I guess the first question we always ask is, we break down the journal article, but then we also ask what can we as clinicians take away from this to help our patients? And I think there is some good things there around recommending healthy screen time, around recommending ergonomics and how much time people should spend if they want to avoid the common physical injuries. Just recap those physical injuries for us if you'd be okay with that, just the common ones that were found in the study.
Sure. So these were self-report. And being a survey, unfortunately, we can't really measure anything directly. So we asked very simply, in the last 12 months, yes or no, have you experienced these symptoms? And they were eye fatigue. However, the participant understands that, wrist or hand pain, so either of those, back or neck pain, and then physical problems, where we gave the specifiers of, for example, headache, muscle aches. allowing the person to essentially read into that anything else that they want that wasn't the previous categories.
And I had to look around, and although this was a cross-sectional survey, and we appreciate taking it with a grain of salt because of that, there's not a lot of higher tier evidence. So this is actually a really interesting paper. So we do take that with a grain of salt, but it's an interesting paper. Now, are you a gamer yourself? Do you have a gaming interest, or is this are you not a gamer?
I keep thinking that I am, so I buy all the things and then don't really use them that much. I have a Nintendo Switch that comes out very casually, but beyond that, really, no. It seems to be something that's been relegated to my childhood.
And I think a lot of our audience would relate to that. I remember, I had to give up any form of gaming to get through med school. There just wasn't time. I remember sitting in the study lab and watching someone play League of Legends or Dota when they should have been studying in the med study labs. And I just thought, that guy's been there for 4 hours. It really is. And we're seeing more and more the potential for addiction. It really is an interesting, evolving field. Now, your study talked about people who intend to make their careers as gamers. And this is, again, something we're encountering a little more as clinicians. Where, there's not a huge esports industry in Australia. There is some. It's obviously more focused around South Korea, the Americas. That said, talk to me about that subset that had the intention to make a career as gamers, because there was an interesting difference between them versus the people who had internet gaming disorder and the rate of physical injury.
Yeah, that's right. So I guess just to take a step back, the reason we were interested in esports players fell into two camps. One was that we thought, okay, they may play more hours per week or more intensely than your average gamer. So if there are negative symptoms associated with video game play, they should be borne out in esports players. The other is that aspiring to become a professional player shouldn't necessarily be pathologized any more than wanting to become a professional athlete. And we know from people who are seeking to become professional athletes, you do see more injuries and harm in those who are training to become an athlete than the general population. So we did want to know more about esports players also for that reason, to try and avoid over pathologizing something that could be a valid career goal. Although, as you say, not a lot of activity here in Australia compared to other continents. So what we did see is a larger proportion of those who wanted to become professional players experienced harm than those who did not want to become professional players. So the percentage was higher. But when we put this into a regression model to try and predict harm, this didn't meet our strict statistical cutoff. So wanting to be a professional player was not predictive of experiencing harm. There's a few reasons that may have happened. So one is we didn't have a large proportion of individuals who wanted to become professional players. The way that the question was worded also meant that those who are currently professional players, so they've been in a league, they've competed, they would answer no to that question because they're not aspiring to, they are. And then the third one that jumps out is, of course, that if you are serious about this, you will buy the ergonomic chair, you will have the ergonomic mouse and keyboard set up, you will have the wrist support to try and potentially minimize any of these symptoms, or you are playing and training in ways that reduce this, similar to an athlete.
I hadn't considered that aspect. That would be protective. So I refer a couple of, like, if someone comes in and they're intending to become an esports gamer, and I don't see that many, it's still relatively rare. One of the things that happens when they get referred to a psychologist is they just tell them, look up the statistics yourself on what the success rate is for esports gamers, because yes, there is the rare person who makes $1 million playing esports, but the actual conversion rate is very slim. It's very slim, and that's something my patients come back and tell me sometimes. I was talking to a few people. There's no actual esports guidelines. I did find a paper about esports that was written by an orthopedic doctor from America, but there's no special interest group in the sports medicine college. There's no special interest group in the RACGP, and I think there actually would be a space for gaming disorder and internet gaming disorder and esports in the RACGP's special interest group. Are there particular groups that you get involved with research? Is there particular bodies that you're commonly working with in terms of this space?
Not in particular when it comes to our work on gaming disorder. So we have a few colleagues who have advised WHO in the development of the gaming disorder diagnostic definition. But in terms of groups, there is, at least in Australia, there is a lack of existing structures. So there aren't societies dedicated to video gaming or gaming disorder research. There aren't dedicated treatment centers. So these are still, I think, in the early days, which could be because it was difficult to diagnose without a proper diagnostic definition, as there is one now in ICD. But I think the strongest interest we've seen has been from parents of younger kids.
That's interesting. So the parents are driving it.
Well, there is a lot of community concern around video gaming. There just isn't that formal structure yet.
Interesting, because a lot of the treatment would not be something that is too novel to us here in general practice. You know, treating carpal tunnel syndrome or repetitive stress injuries is not that different to our regular day, our regular consulting in our rooms. And it is also interesting you mentioned the parents, because from the addiction side of things, the thing that really helps the kids with internet gaming disorder, it seems to be the parental involvement in the relatively extensive psychotherapy they have to undertake. So watch this space, I guess, is a good thing to say. Let's talk about the study participants, because in the study, there was about 17.9% of the study met the threshold for internet gaming disorder based on the questionnaire. In the population, we see about 3 to 4% in the last study I saw. Obviously, this was a subset of gamers, so that skews it. But it was a higher percentage than I had expected.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, over 20% pretending to be a professional player.
Yes. So, I mean, the 20% jumps out as very high because it, as you say, it's a very low percentage of those who actually have a good crack at it will be able to support themselves, let alone make it really big. That said, intention to do something is quite divorced from behavior. I've been intending to exercise more regularly for the last 4 months, and that hasn't translated into behavior quite as well as I would have hoped. So it's difficult to know, just with the way that this question was worded, what that actually means to the participants who completed this study. We do have we are about to roll out the next version of the survey, and there we intend to ask a little bit more specific questions. So we focused esports specifically on those who want to become gamers. But as you noted, there are other ways to make a living from video gaming where you don't have to be particularly good at playing a game. You can be an engaging Twitch streamer. You can have a YouTube channel. You can be involved in gaming without the actual play being the necessary focus of it. And those could all be career aspirations for someone who does game. So I think it'll be important to tease that 21.7% apart. Some of those could be people who do have aspirations, but being professional could just be playing in a tournament. They're not going to make a living out of it. Or it could be that they're lumping in other forms of income that aren't necessarily gaming itself, but are related to it. In terms of the 17.9% for IGD-10 cutoff, when we look at enriched samples, that number isn't too different. It varies a fair amount from population to population, but when you focus on gamers, the numbers are around 17, 20, 15%.
Interesting. So I guess if people were wanting to keep an eye out for what's coming out from you guys, I'm not sure if you want people to be driven to the study recruitment and the participant recruitment. Is there anything people should keep an eye out for, or I'm not sure how you recruit participants for the upcoming studies, but is there anything you wanted to mention?
I mean, if anyone's interested in the work we're doing in this space, they could have a look at the website of the National Centre for Youth Substance Use Research at the University of Queensland. We have our projects listed there. Main focus is substance use in young people, but we also have, as you've seen here, branched into behavioural addictions. And we do update our findings as they come out on there, as well as the university's news outlets.
All right, Dave. Well, that has been a lovely chat. I do love a good journal club article. We don't get to do it as much as we'd like, but you have a great day. Thank you for your time, and I'm going to go get some lunch.
My pleasure. Have a good lunch.